I opened the letter on a Wednesday morning, not Tuesday. I know I said next week, and next week was Tuesday. And I sat at the kitchen table on Tuesday morning with the envelope in front of me, and I looked at it for 40 minutes. And then I got up and made more coffee, and came back and looked at it for another 20 minutes. And then Norma arrived. She came in, looked at me, looked at the envelope, looked back at me. She said, "You still haven't opened it." I told her I was working up to it. She sat down across from me and put her hands flat on the table, the way she does when she has decided something. She said, "Ed, it's a letter from your wife, not a subpoena." I told her that was easy for her to say. She said, "Dennis left me a voicemail once that I didn't listen to for 3 weeks. It was from the day before he died. He called to ask what I wanted for dinner." I knew that's what it was. He always called to ask what I wanted for dinner, and I still couldn't listen to it for 3 weeks. So I understand. I asked her if she ever listened to it. She said, yes, he wanted to know if I wanted pasta or the chicken thing I make with the olives. I told you, very romantic, Dennis. She looked at the envelope. She said, "The difference between me and you, Ed, is that Dennis's voicemail was a question. Margaret's letter is an answer, and I think part of you is afraid of what the answer is going to be." I didn't say anything, she said. "I'm going to make the coffee. You're going to open the letter, and then you're going to tell me what it says, or you're not going to tell me what it says, and either way, I'll be right here." She got up and went to the kitchen. I looked at my name in Margaret's handwriting. I picked up the envelope. What was in the envelope? Before I tell you the letter, I want to tell you something about the act of opening it before I tell you what was inside, because I think the act itself is part of what I need to say. My hands were not steady. I want to be accurate about that, because I think it matters. I am a man who spent 40 years in emergency medicine. I have performed procedures in conditions of extreme urgency, in rooms where the margin for error was measured in seconds, with hands that were required to be steady because the alternative was unacceptable. My hands were trained. My hands knew how to do difficult things. They were not steady when I opened that envelope. Not because I was frightened, exactly, because I understood, in the way you understand things, when the moment finally arrives after a long preparation for it, that what I was about to receive was irreversible. That once the letter was read, it would be read, that the words would exist in me in a way they had not existed before, and that whatever they were, I would carry them for the rest of my life. There is something specific about receiving a communication from someone who is gone. A letter written before the diagnosis, handed to a neighbor with instructions for the right moment, kept faithfully for 34 months. It is not like a memory, which you can blur or soften or reframe over time. It is fixed. It is exact. It is the person as they were on a specific Tuesday afternoon, with a pen in their hand, saying what they had been meaning to say. I was not ready, and I was as ready as I was ever going to be. Those two things were both true. I opened it. The letter. I want to share what Margaret wrote. I have been deciding for the week since I read it whether this belongs here, whether it belongs to the private record or the public one, whether Margaret, who was a private person in many of the ways I was not, would have wanted these words read by people who never met her. And I have decided that she would, not because she was indifferent to privacy, because I think she wrote the letter knowing I would need to do something with it. She knew me. She knew that I process things by putting them into words and sending the words somewhere. She knew that holding something this large alone in the sealed compartment was not something I was capable of doing indefinitely without it becoming a weight rather than a gift. I think she wrote the letter for me, and I think she knew that sharing it was part of what I would need to do to receive it fully. She was always smarter than me about what I needed. The letter was 1 page, handwritten, front and back. She wrote, "Small." The kind of small that means a person has a great deal to say and is being careful with the space. It began like this: Ed. I wrote this the week before the diagnosis. I didn't know yet. I wrote it because I have been meaning to write it for years, and I kept waiting for the right moment, which I realize now is something you and I both did in our own ways for a very long time. So I am writing it now, on a Tuesday afternoon, because Tuesday afternoon is the only moment available to me, and I have decided that it is sufficient. I want to tell you 3 things. The first thing is that I know you loved me. I never, not for one day in 41 years, doubted that you loved me. I want you to understand that clearly and completely, because I know you, and I know that when I'm gone you are going to spend a great deal of time wondering whether I knew, whether I felt it, whether the years of half-absence meant that the love didn't reach me. It reached me, Ed, not always in the form I needed, not always at the right time, or in the right room, or with the full attention I was hoping for. But it reached me. In the way you learned the name of every doctor who treated me for anything, because you needed to understand exactly what was happening to me. In the way you made the coffee every morning without being asked, for 41 years, without once treating it as something that required acknowledgement. In the way you looked at me sometimes, when you thought I wasn't watching, with the specific expression I first noticed in Pittsburgh in 1979, through a slightly open door, before you had any reason to look at me that way. You kept that look for 41 years. You gave it to the garden sometimes, and to the patients you were most worried about, and occasionally to a book that had earned it. But mostly you gave it to me. I know you loved me. That was never the question. The second thing I want to tell you is that I forgive you. Not for anything terrible. I want to be precise about this, because you are a precise man, and vague forgiveness would not satisfy you. It would feel incomplete. You would find the edges of it and worry at them. I forgive you for the years of being half somewhere else, for the meetings that ran over and the messages that couldn't wait, and the evenings you arrived home already gone, already back at the hospital in your head before you had set your keys down. For the 1,000 small moments when I reached toward you and felt you turn slightly away. For the 2008 conversation that you heard and did something with, but not enough, not yet. You weren't ready yet, and I knew you weren't ready yet, and I need you to make peace with it too. I forgive you for all of it, completely, without reservation. And I need you to receive that forgiveness and not argue with it, because I know you will want to argue with it. You will want to say, "But I should have done better." You will want to hold the weight of it, because holding weight is something you are extraordinarily good at, and setting it down is something you have always struggled with. You have been holding weight your entire adult life, in the ER, and in this house, and inside yourself, in the sealed compartments where you put the things you didn't know what else to do with. Set it down. I am asking you, specifically and directly, to set it down. You came home, Ed. In the time we had at the end, you came home. And the man who came home in those last months was the man I married in 1981, which means he was always there, always in you, waiting for the circumstances that would finally give him room. I knew he was there. I waited for him because I knew. That was my choice, made freely, every year, and I have never regretted a single day of it. The third thing is the most important and the simplest. I want you to be happy. Not eventually. Not when the grief has passed or transformed into something more manageable. As soon as you are able. I want you to laugh, Ed. The real kind. I know the difference. I've been watching you laugh for 41 years. I know the polite one and the real one. I want the real one. I want you to sit on the back porch and watch the garden in the summer light and feel the specific satisfaction of a man who built something and is watching it grow. I want you to have people at the table. Norma, obviously, because Norma doesn't wait for invitations, and that is in this context one of her better qualities. I want you to keep talking to people. I watched you, in our last months together, become someone who used words, real words, the words that live inside the thing rather than around it. And I want you to keep doing that. It suits you more than you know. I want you to be here, Ed. Fully here, in the rooms you are actually in, with the people who are actually in them with you. That is all I ever wanted. I just wanted you here. Come home. Stay home. I love you. Margaret. What happened after I read it? I sat with the letter for a long time. I don't know exactly how long. Norma came back to the table at some point, quietly, which is not her natural register, and which told me that she understood the weight of the room. She set a cup of coffee in front of me and sat down across from me without saying anything, which is the greatest act of restraint I have ever witnessed from Norma Jean Kowalski in 22 years of knowing her. I read the letter a second time. Then I handed it to her. She read it slowly. When she finished, she set it on the table and looked at it for a moment without speaking. Then she said, "She was something, Ed." I told her I knew. She said, "She gave this to me in October. About a week before she died, she came to the back door one afternoon. I remember because it was cold, earlier than it should have been that year, and she had her coat on and she was holding the envelope, and she said, 'Norma, I need you to keep this safe and give it to Ed when you think the time is right.' And I said, 'Margaret, how will I know when the time is right?' And she looked at me and she said, 'You'll know. He'll have that look.' I asked, 'What look?' Norma said, 'The look you had on Tuesday when you were staring at the envelope and couldn't open it.' She said, 'The right time is when he's afraid to open it, because when he's afraid to open it, it means he knows he needs to.' I sat with that. Margaret had not only written the letter, she had planned the delivery. She had thought carefully about who would hold it and when it would be given, and what I would need to be in order to receive it. She had chosen Norma, loud, blunt, constitutionally incapable of tact. Norma, with the specific understanding that Norma would wait, would read the room, would recognize the moment, because she is underneath all the noise. One of the most perceptive people I have ever met. She chose exactly the right person. She always chose exactly the right person. I said, "She asked you to hold on to this for almost 3 years. Norma said, "Of course. She asked me to." Said it the way you say something that requires no further elaboration. Of course I did. She asked me to. Norma, who cannot hold her own opinions for 20 minutes under ordinary conditions, had held a sealed envelope for 34 months because Margaret asked her to, and she understood what it meant to honor that kind of trust. I looked at the fake succulent on the windowsill, the one with the handwritten tag. This one is fake. It cannot die. I said, "Norma, I need to say something." She said, "If you're about to thank me, I'm going to stop you right there, because I will cry, and I have a strict policy about crying in other people's kitchens." I said, "I'm going to thank you anyway." She said, "Ed, I am serious." I said, "Thank you for the pierogies, for the dying plant that arrived before the fake one, for every Tuesday for 3 years, for holding this letter for 34 months and knowing exactly when to put it on the table, for telling me I looked terrible on the 11th day because I did look terrible, and I needed someone to say it instead of asking how I was doing. Thank you." Norma looked at the table. She was quiet for several seconds. For Norma, several seconds of silence is the equivalent of a long speech. Then she said, "I'm going to need you to not do that again, because I meant what I said about the crying policy." She wiped her eye with the back of her hand in a way that was engineered to look like she was not wiping her eye. She was not successful. Then she said, "Also, you're completely out of coffee filters." I had to use a paper towel. I cannot believe a grown man is out of coffee filters. And just like that, we were back. What the letter changed, and what it didn't. I want to be honest with you about this part, because I think the honest version is more useful than the version where the letter resolves everything. The letter did not fix the grief. I want to be clear about that, because there is a version of this story, the neater version, the one that arrives in films, where the letter closes something, where the words from the person you lost transform the loss into something that can be carried without bending, and you walk out of the kitchen lighter, the weight redistributed into something dignified and complete. That is not what happened. The grief is still there. It does not go away. The second cup problem is not fully resolved. The Tuesday program is still a program I watch alone. The garden is tended, but it is a different garden now. Quieter, and there are mornings when I am out there before the light is fully up, and I think about the back porch in July and feel the specific ache of a thing that happened once and cannot happen in quite the same way again. What the letter changed is something subtler, something that took me several days to be able to name. It changed what I am carrying. Before the letter, the grief had a companion that was in some ways heavier than the grief itself. The weight of the years, the accumulated evidence of the times I had been half somewhere else, the understanding that I had been given something extraordinary for 41 years and had not always received it with the full attention it deserved. The weight of things you cannot go back and change, which is the specific, particular weight that nobody else can lift for you because nobody else was there. She knew I was carrying it. She wrote the letter to address it directly, with the precision of a woman who understood that vague comfort would not reach me. She did not write, "It's fine, don't worry about it. We had a good life." She wrote with the specific, surgical clarity of a person who knows exactly what the other person needs to hear and is not willing to soften it into something that won't do the job. She told me what she knew. She told me it reached her. She told me she forgave me. And she told me to stop arguing with the forgiveness. And then she told me what she wanted. Be happy. Be here. Come home. Stay home. Those 4 instructions, in that order, are the most complete thing anyone has ever given me. The trying is different now. It has her permission in it, her forgiveness. Delivered in her handwriting on a page she wrote before she knew the diagnosis was coming, has changed the quality of what I am carrying in a way I cannot fully explain, except to say that the weight is the same, but it sits differently. Like the difference between carrying something you were given and carrying something you took without asking. I was given the weight. She told me to set it down. I am working on that. She said I would. She said I would want to argue with the forgiveness and keep holding the weight. And she told me to set it down anyway. She knew me better than I knew myself. She always did. What Dennis's card has to do with this? I want to go back to something Norma told me a few weeks ago, because it connects to the letter in a way I have been thinking about since Wednesday. Dennis had written Norma a birthday card 6 years before he died. 4 sentences. Simple, direct, honest. Why he was glad she was his wife, in the exact plain language of a man who was not given to poetry and didn't need it because the truth stated simply was sufficient. He wrote it. He put it in his desk. He never gave it to her. Norma found it 6 years after his death, going through boxes. and sat at the kitchen table and read it alone and said, what was he waiting for? Margaret wrote her letter and gave it to Norma 2 weeks before she died. She did not wait for the right moment. She decided that the Tuesday afternoon she was sitting at her desk with a pen in her hand was the right moment, because it was the moment available to her, and she used it. The difference between those two choices, Dennis's card in the desk and Margaret's letter handed to the neighbor with specific instructions, is the difference between something that was felt and something that was given. The feeling is not the gift. The giving is the gift. Dennis felt everything he wrote in that card. Norma knows that. She read the 4 sentences, and she said it sounded exactly like him. Completely true. Nothing in it that surprised her about who he was or how he felt. The feeling was real, but he held it. He waited. He looked for a moment large enough to justify handing his wife a card that said simply why he was glad she existed. And the moment never felt quite large enough, or the time never felt quite right, or there was always going to be another birthday, another occasion, another opening for the thing that was already written and waiting in the desk. And then he died, and Norma found the card alone. I want you to hear that story alongside Margaret's letter and understand what the difference is between them. Not in terms of love. Dennis loved Norma completely, and the card proved it. But in terms of what the other person received while they were alive to receive it, Margaret received her letter. Not the finished version. Not the one delivered after the diagnosis when the time was finite and the circumstances forced the saying of things. She received it before all of that, written on an ordinary Tuesday when she was healthy and the diagnosis was still weeks away, and there was no occasion, no urgency, no force majeure that made the writing necessary, except her own decision that it was time to say what she had been meaning to say. She decided that Tuesday was sufficient, that the absence of a grand occasion was not a reason to wait. She was right. She is always right. The occasion is always Tuesday. What I want you to do with this, I have something specific to ask you, and I want to be precise about it, because I think precision is what makes the difference between something you think about and something you actually do. I want you to write the letter, not literally, or literally, if that is what you need. But I want you to identify the thing you have been meaning to say to someone in your life, the thing that is true and has been true for years, and that the person who needs to receive it has not received in clear, unambiguous, this is what I mean language. Maybe it is what Margaret wrote. The I know you loved me, the forgiveness given without condition, the I want you to be happy, delivered not as a platitude, but as a specific, actionable instruction. Maybe it is what Dennis wrote and never sent. The 4 sentences about why you are glad this person exists. Simple, direct, completely true. The kind of thing that a person finds alone in a box 6 years after you're gone and says, what were they waiting for? Don't be what they were waiting for. Write it, say it, put it in front of the person who needs to receive it while they are alive to receive it, and while you are alive to watch it land. Not in a text message if you can avoid it. Not in an email. In your voice or in your handwriting. In the medium that carries the most of you. Because the feeling is not the gift. The giving is the gift. The decision to move something from the interior of your life, where it lives as a truth you hold, to the exterior of it, where it becomes a truth that another person can hold too. Dennis had 4 sentences written, and they stayed in his desk. Margaret had 1 page, and she walked to Norma's back door in the cold. Be Margaret. Norma, walking out the door. I want to end with Norma, because Norma was the beginning, and she deserves the final word. When she left on Wednesday, After the paper towel coffee filter, after the letter, after the thank you, she told me not to give, and received with one white die and a complaint about the coffee filters. She stood at the back door for a moment with her coat on and her bag over her arm. She said, "Ed, I need to tell you something, and I need you to actually hear it." I recognized the phrasing immediately. It was almost exactly what Margaret had said to me at this same kitchen table in 2008. I don't know if Norma knew that. I think she didn't. I think it was simply the natural language of a person who needs another person to be present for something real. She said, "When Dennis died, I thought the hardest part was going to be the large moments. First Christmas, first anniversary, the things that announce themselves. And those were hard. But the hardest thing was the small days. The days when nothing particular was happening. And I reached for the phone to tell him something small and then remembered." She paused. "You know what I mean." I told her I knew exactly what she meant. She said, "What I want to say is that you're getting better at the small days. I can see it. The garden, the coffee. 2 cups again," I noticed. "The way you sit on the porch sometimes in the evening, just sitting, not doing anything, not looking like a man who is waiting to be somewhere else. You're getting better at being here." She looked at me directly, the way Norma looks at you when she has decided you need to receive something, and she is not going to look away until she is sure it has arrived. She said, "That's what she wanted, you know." She told me the day she gave me the letter. She said, "I just need him to learn how to be here after I'm gone. Not for me, for himself." She said she'd spent 40 years watching you learn how to be here, and she was afraid that when she wasn't there to pull you back into the room, you'd drift again. She didn't want that for you. She picked up her bag. "So be here, Ed, okay? Just keep being here." I told her I was working on it. She said, "I know, I can tell." She opened the door. Cold air from outside. Then she stopped without turning around, in the way of someone who has just remembered something they were going to say. She said, "Oh, I almost forgot. I'm bringing someone next Tuesday, a friend of mine. Her name is Carol. She's a widow. She lives in Akron. I've been telling her about you." I said, "Norma." She said, "She's very nice, Ed. She volunteers at a library. She has excellent posture. She has a fern. Her fern is enormous." I said, "Norma, I don't need." She said, "I'm not asking. I'm informing. There's a difference. See you Tuesday." She left before I could complete the sentence. I stood in the kitchen. I looked at the fake succulent on the windowsill, at the 2 cups on the counter, at the back porch through the window, the garden in the late afternoon light, the tomatoes doing what tomatoes do in November, which is finish. And then I laughed. The real kind. The kind that starts in the chest. Margaret would have found this entire situation very funny. She had a sense of humor about things she loved, and she loved me. And she would have found it entirely characteristic that the first intervention she arranged for after her death was Norma Jean Kowalski arriving at my door with pierogies and insufficient plant knowledge. And that the second intervention was apparently a widow from Akron with excellent posture and a large fern. She chose the right people. She always chose the right people. In the comments, I want to know, is there something you have written and not given? A dentist card in a desk somewhere. 4 sentences that are true and waiting for an occasion. Tell me about it, and then consider whether Tuesday is enough of an occasion. It is. It always was. And next week, Carol from Akron is coming to Tuesday. I make no promises about what happens next. None at all. My name is Dr. Edward Carver. I'll see you then.